Hi everyone, my name is Helen Samuel and this is your market outlook for 19th to 24th June 2022. Sunday. This week opens on Sunday with the New Zealand Business Purchasing Managers Index, which was previously at 51.2. When the actual is greater than the forecast, it will be bullish for the Kiwi. Monday. The US will be observing their Juneteenth National Independence Day. The US market will be less liquid and can lead to both abnormally low and abnormally high volatility. The Reserve Bank of Australia's governor will be speaking. We expect high volatility as he speaks. The German Producer Price Index month over month had a previous figure of 2.8%. The consensus figure is 1.4%. A higher than expected result will indicate a strong euro. Still on Monday, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee member, Jonathan Haskell, will be speaking. Later in the day, Catherine Mann, an MPC member, will also be speaking. High volatility is to be expected in the course of their speeches. The New Zealand's Westpac consumer sentiment was previously at 92.1. If the actual figure is greater than the previous figure, it will be good for the Kiwi. Tuesday, the Confederation of British Industries Industrial Trend Orders was previously at 26. A higher than expected reading will be good for the British pound. The Canadian core retail sales month over month had a previous figure of 2.4%. The consensus is 2.0%. Also, the Canadian New Housing Price Index is previously at 0.3%. The consensus is expecting 0.6%. If the actual figure is higher than the forecast, it will be good for the loonie. Still on Canada, the retail sale month over month was previously at 0.2%. The consensus is at 1.4%. A higher than expected figure will be good for the loonie. The US existing homes had a previous figure of 5.61 million. It has a consensus of 5.41 million. If the actual figure is greater than expected, it will be good for the greenback. The New Zealand Westpac consumer sentiment had a previous figure of 92.1. Their trade balance year over year and month over month were minus 9.12 million and 584 million respectively. A higher than expected reading is good for the Kiwi. Wednesday. The British Consumer Price Index month over month and year over year were previously at 2.5% and 9.0% respectively, while the consensus figure are 2.6% and 9.1% respectively. A higher than expected result will be good for the cable. Still on the cable, the Producer Price Index increase month over month had a previous figure of 1.1% and a consensus figure remaining at 1.1%. A higher than expected reading is good for the pound. The Canadian Core Consumer Price Index month over month and year over year had a previous figure of 5.7% and 0.7% respectively. The consensus figure were 5.4%, 0.4% and 0.5% respectively. A higher than expected figure is bullish for the loonie. Thursday, the French and German Purchasing Managers Index for the month of June had previous figures of 54.6 and 58.3 respectively. The consensus figures were 55 and 58.6. If the actual is higher than the forecast, it will be good for the euro. On the European Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, which was previously at 54.6 with a consensus of 54.9. If the previous is greater than the forecast, it will be good for the euro. The Market Composite Purchasing Managers Index had a previous figure of 54.8 and a consensus of 55.3. A higher than expected figure is good for the euro. Still on Thursday, the US Current Account Quarterly Report had a previous figure of minus 217.9 billion. A higher than expected figure is good for the greenback. The US Market Composite Index and the Service Purchasing Managers Index had a previous figure of 53.6 and 53.4 respectively. A higher reading than the forecast is good for the dollar. New Zealand will be observing Maori New Year for the whole day. Low volatility is expected. Japanese core CPI year over year has a previous figure of 2.1% and a forecast to remain the same. If the actual is higher than the consensus, it will be good for the yen. The UK's core retail sales month over month, year over year were previously at 1.4%, minus 6.1%, and a consensus figure of minus 0.2% and minus 8.4% respectively. Higher than expected figures are good for the cable. The retail sales month over month and year over year had previous figures of 1.4% and minus 4.9%. A consensus figure for the year over year is minus 7.2%, a higher than expected result will be good for the cable. Moving to the Eurozone, the German business expectations had a previous figure of 86.9 and a consensus figure of 87.5. A higher than expected reading is good for the euro. The German IFO Business Climate Index had a previous figure of 93 and consensus of 92.8. The German Current Assessment had a previous figure of 99.5 and a consensus of 99. In both cases, a higher than expected consensus is good for the euro. The US Michigan Consumers Expectations had a previous figure of 46.8 and a higher than expected figure is good for the dollar. Also, the Michigan Consumer Sentiment had a previous figure of 50.2 and a consensus of 59.1. A higher than expected figure is good for the dollar. In conclusion, the new home sales month over month had a previous value of minus 16.6%. The month of May had 591,000 with a consensus figure of 605,000. If the actual figure is greater than the consensus figure, that will be good for the dollar. Thanks for watching. My name is Helen Samuel. Have a great trading week.